Continuing our reading in Yellow Eyes by Rutherford Montgomery, Chapter 16, Trapped. Spring had come again to the high country. Yellow Eyes was sleek and sinewy, not fat, but in perfect condition. His fur was as soft as a kitten's, and he was well groomed. However, he was not satisfied. The urge of spring had been in his blood for months now. He had traveled far along the ridge marking the Continental Divide. On his trip northward, he had turned back after 80 miles had been covered. In going south, he had padded 60-odd miles before he turned about. Always the thought that he might, by some strange magic, meet the Golden One on a wind-swept ledge or in the dank coolness of a thicket kept him traveling. The resurrection of spring was bringing the peak flowers to bloom beside the melting drifts. The gaudy daisy was coloring the slopes far below. Everywhere life was stirring and the earth was giving birth to living things. It seemed the Golden One might well come bounding down a hillside to meet him. But she did not come, and his wail tossed to the Milky Way went unanswered. Not in the whole 140 miles did he once cross the scent of a cougar. One morning he sighted a cave and sought shelter there. He paused at the entrance to take stock of possible occupants. His black whiskers twitched and his nose wrinkled. The cave was inhabited. An instant later, a shaggy she-bear came hurling out upon him. Her scream of angry rage was fearful. Yellow Eyes had invaded her den where two cubs lay sleeping. The yellow killer flattened himself upon the rocky floor, his long claws seeking a grip. Surprise and a desire to retreat filled his mind. He was not angry, no lust to kill filled him, but he had to make a defense and dared not turn his back upon this charging mass of bone and teeth. When the she-bear was almost upon him, so close that her sweeping paws were reaching for his shoulders, he leaped. His tawny length swept up and over her, and as he rose, he lashed out with a powerful slashing blow. His claws ripped gashes along the side of her head. The infuriated bear whirled and charged again. The enemy she sought to destroy was now inside the cave, close to her cubs. Her squalling cries had awakened the babies, and they added their thin whispers and whimpers to the din. Again Yellow Eyes flattened himself and prepared to leap. This time his claws found no spot on the smooth floor where they could get a grip. His spring, as the bear hurled upon him, was short and landed him across her shoulders. In a whirling mass of fur and hair, the two went down. Rolling and pitching, they struggled out of the cave and topped the rim down the sheer drop at the door of the den. The she-bear was struggling to envelop the yellow killer in her arms and crush him. Yellow Eyes was ripping and slashing, attempting to free himself from the clutches of his assailant. No longer was he the amicable wanderer. Fury flamed within him, and his yellow eyes were afire with the lust to kill. The two struggling bodies landed with a jarring impact upon the rocks below the cave. The she-bear struck upon her head and shoulders. Yellow Eyes felt a searing pain in his hindquarters. The she-bear stiffened, and her clutching forepaws loosened their grip. Yellow Eyes tore himself free and whirled away from her. Once clear of her massive body, he sprang upon her. His leap was weak and carried him little over 5 feet, but he sank his fangs into the neck of the bear and lashed at her back with his hind claws. She did not respond. Yellow Eyes ceased his attack and snarled deeply. For a minute he stood upon her carcass, glaring about. From the rim above came the cries of the cubs calling to their mama. Flattening his ears and swinging his head from side to side, the great cat sent his cry up the ledge. Then he leaped from the body of the bear and moved into a thicket. As he went, he felt sharp pains in his back parts. His powerful hind legs would not lift and thrust forward as they should. Finally, the pain drove him to the depths of a yellow willow cover, where he lay down to lick his wounds. The dark shadow of tragedy ever stalks in the big woods and over the high country. Above in the cave, two cubs faced slow death with their mother lifeless at the foot of the cliff. Yellow Eyes, badly injured, lay in a thicket. Neither would have sought battle except for chance, the factor shaping so many lives in the wild. By chance, the deer misses one sound or smell, and a hurling killer is upon him. By chance, the snowshoe rabbit wanders across the path of a coyote, and over it all there is the relentless law of survival, the struggle to exist, the threat of extinction. Mother Love had brought about the tragedy. Yellow Eyes did not molest the cubs. He lay in the thicket of willow all that day. His back stiffened and throbbed. When evening shadows began to deepen, he crawled out and hobbled away. His movements lacked the smooth, gliding grace with which he usually slipped through the twilight. Painfully, he made his way toward his own cave. It was not until the next day that he crawled into the shelter of the home he had known since he was a spotted kitten. He lay down at the entrance to the cave and flattened his head upon the paws. Low snarls rose in his throat. All that day he lay, watching the valley below. When night came, he tried to rise, but sank back. The pain in his hindquarters was so cutting, it mastered his desire to search for food. He sank back and lay resting, his amber eyes half closed. By morning, hunger began to demand action. He moved stiffly to the head of the trail, which he used in descending from the ledge. Always before, he had leaped down a 10-foot wall of rock to a fallen log, and from there to a grassy ledge. Now he was forced to slide down to the log, and from there to the ledge. Hunting was painful. His powerful hind legs refused to hurl him forward. A rabbit escaped from almost beneath his feet, and a cock grouse, roosting on a low limb, whirled away as his clutching paws fell short of their mark. Snarling defiantly, he moved on. Day found him lapping water at a spring and glaring at his distorted image in the clear water. From the spring he wandered on at a crooked and unsteady pace. 2 hours later, Cougar George, the human, stopped at the spring to make camp. He lay down to drink and saw the cougar tracks. Instantly he was alert. Without drinking, he raised himself to his knees and examined the ground. An eager exclamation burst from his lips. "The big time and met hard luck." He leaped to his feet. The tracks were fresh, and as he followed them to the spruce cover, he saw that the big cat was badly crippled. His eyes flamed eagerly. Here was the chance he had been looking for, but never seriously expected. He whistled to his dogs. He had 5 new hounds beside the 3 he had carried through the winter. The dogs were lying beside a boulder where he had ordered them to rest. They sprang up and nosed the fresh trail eagerly. Instantly, they lifted their voices in eager cries. Cougar George jerked his rifle from its scabbard on one of the pack saddles. He gave the hounds their release in a gruff command, and they were off. They had not expected to hunt the yellow killer, but merely to look for his sign and get a camp located. The day before, he had received word from Sale that he and his party would be up in a few weeks for the big hunt planned that winter. He grinned eagerly as he pictured their surprise when he led them out to the back of his cabin and showed them the biggest cougar pelt they had ever seen. Mr. Sale would buy it, of course, and later tell his friends how he had shot the big cat. He was forced to trot to keep within calling distance of the pack of dogs. The 3 veteran hounds were sure to hold the trail for the green members of the pack. Cougar George did not expect the big cat to be treed, but he did feel sure that the dogs would overtake him and hold him at bay until his rifle could finish the hunt. In a thicket above the yellow spring, Yellow Eyes heard the cry of the pack and rose from the bed of pine needles. His tail lashed and he whirled to face the mountain. A sharp pain in his hips warned him that he could not travel fast. He moved out of the thicket, heading instinctively toward the cave on the rim above. Driving himself as fast as he could, the king cat worked his way upward. His progress was slow, and the pack rapidly closed the gap between them. Twice Yellow Eyes halted, panting and snarling, almost deciding to make a stand. Each time he heard the shout of Cougar George encouraging his dogs. The hunter was keeping close enough to the pack to be able to close in rapidly. The pack sighted the yellow killer as he entered an open meadow at the foot of the cliff. They leaped forward, howling and baying. Cougar George shouted wildly and plunged upward. Yellow Eyes leaped to the grassy ledge below the fallen log. He steadied his quivering hindquarters for the leap to the log. He leaped, but fell short. Clutching at the log, he clung there. His powerful forelegs drew him slowly upward. The leader of the pack sprang forward just as the big cat hauled himself to his perch. He leaped upward, snapping and yelping. One of Yellow Eye's great paws swept downward and sent the dog hurling to the ground, his head ripped and bleeding. The other dogs rushed in and swarmed up the log. They could not reach the big cat, but they were baying and calling loudly, and Cougar George was shouting to them from the timber below. Yellow Eyes turned and looked up at the rim above. He must make the leap or Cougar George would break from the timber and find an easy mark for his rifle. He crouched and leaped. His spring was a desperate attempt to make his hind legs function. Upward he shot, but his forepaws fell a foot short of the rim. He slid back and landed on the log, where he balanced unsteadily, snarling down at the dogs. Again he gathered himself and leaped. Again he fell short and dropped back. Each time, the pain in his hips was like the stabbing of a knife. Whirling, he faced the dogs, his tail lashing, his fangs bared. He sent a defiant cry of fury hurling down at his tormentors. The cry was so weird and rage-filled that the dogs backed away a few yards and were silent for a moment. Then Yellow Eyes saw Cougar George leap from the timber and heard his shout. Panic almost made him leap from the log and attack the dogs in the hope of escaping into the timber below. But his natural cunning came to his rescue. He turned and crouched low upon the log. His tawny length shot upward. This time his claws caught the ledge, and he clung to it. His helpless hindquarters dangled as he pulled upward. In that moment, a rifle cracked, and a bullet splattered upon the rock wall. Cougar George was snap shooting and doing an excellent job of it, considering that he was out of breath and running up the steep slope. Slowly, Yellow Eyes swung himself to the ledge and staggered into the cave. Another bullet clipped the ledge as he slid from view. Cougar George shouted exultantly as he came up. He had the big cat in a cave. That was a certain sign that the yellow killer was hurt badly. He encouraged his dogs to keep up their noise and prepared to climb up to the cave. The rocky face of the cliff offered difficulties, but Cougar George knew how to climb. He found a crevice leading upward and slowly drew himself along the sheer wall, his rifle slung over his shoulder to allow both hands freedom. Slowly he worked his way to the ledge above. Crawling out upon the flat stone floor, he pulled his rifle from his shoulder. Inside the cave, Yellow Eyes heard him clamber up the ledge, heard him get to his feet, then listened while the hunter stood for a moment inspecting his rifle. Getting to his feet, the big cat faced the entrance. He waited until he heard Cougar George move forward. Then he turned painfully and moved back into the depth of the cleft. Memory of the days when, as an orphan seeking shelter, he had examined the cave came to his assistance. He remembered the narrow opening at the back. Heaving himself into it, he climbed painfully out upon the rocky rim above. For a moment he halted, snarling and lashing his tail, then moved away toward the fastness of the ragged peaks above. Cougar George's chagrin and wrath was great when he discovered the opening at the back of the cave. He knew that the dogs would have to be taken several miles along the face of the cliff before they could get to the bench above, where they could take up the trail of the king cat again. Grimly, he slid into the fallen log and faced upward until the spring where he had left his pack animals. Mr. Sale and his friends would get to hunt the big cat after all. And that's the end of chapter 16.